in some sense, like the origins of parkour is the real life story of Fight Club. Um, but there's this interesting place where like it bifurcates, right?
Yeah.
There's the place where like this desire to grow is motivated so much by anger, and then there's a place where it goes into a place of love, right? Stefan says, right, in some sense, training with David, as powerful and impactful as it was like training to the dark side. And then he went and trained with Williams, and Williams was like the light side of the force. And in the book, there's a moment where Williams I think he's 11 years old when this realization arises for him. He does this jump and it transforms him, right? He feels like, because his brothers could do this jump, he's so much younger than them, and he comes and he's able to do this jump. It's this rite of passage for him, and it feels like totally transformational. And then he brings his friend, and his friend does the same jump, and he can see that the jump didn't mean to his friend what it meant to him. And then he makes this switch, this realization that what he's there for isn't the jump, it's the meaning. And so it's like that's where my work is, right? Like that's what I've been trying to do. But like Williams made that realization in like, I don't know, 1995 or something, and he was an 11-year-old boy. The reason I wanted to bring us back to this like Fight Club thing is it's like, I can tell you what Eric Weinstein says and what Jordan Peterson says, and Daniel Schmachtenberger talking about how, we're stuck in this self-extinguishing cycle of exponential stuff, but I'm mostly just re-articulating them, right? But there's something interesting about the fact that the movement community, the parkour people we share interest in this. Like there's so many people in our community who are picking this stuff up, and there's like a kind of insight that's coming out of it. It's like I'm having chats with John Vervaeke because he's intrigued by how parkour in some sense is like a seed for a practice or a set of practices of wisdom cultivation that can be a solution for the problems that we face in the world. Welcome to the Evolve, Move, Play podcast, where we bring you the most interesting and enlightening conversations around movement practice and how you can become the most heroic version of yourself through pursuing movement that's relevant to your nature. This is a podcast that's going to feature some of the top movers in the world, some of the most amazing movement thinkers, and people from fields that are related to movement as far afield as evolutionary theory, strength and conditioning, and everything in between. So if you're interested in movement, please stick around. And if you like our work and want to support it, please consider supporting us on Patreon, because this podcast is completely listener supported. We don't want to take any advertising. We don't want to interrupt your experience of watching the show. So what really helps us get the best thinkers on, have the time to put these together, have the best quality for you guys as far as audio and video, is your support. So please consider supporting us and enjoy the rest of the show. Welcome back to another episode of the Evolve, Move, Play podcast. So our guest this week is Brandon Douglas. Brandon Douglas is a longtime member of the Colorado parkour community. He's worked with Apex Movement in various capacities in Parkour EDU. He's the founder of the Height Drop podcast and was for a long time one of the best parkour speed athletes in the world. So really somebody I've admired for many years. He's also somebody who's taken a big interest in kind of how movement intersects with meaning, and how this can be more of a growth and self-development pathway. So this is kind of a funny interview because we initially were going to kind of have Brandon on my podcast to be interviewed here, or I was going to be wearing that interviewer hat, but it ended up kind of switching because we're going to do this for both of our podcasts. So this will be appearing on his podcast, but in this case, Brandon is primarily kind of asking me about my perspective, because he's very interested in the ideas around movement and meaning and how those things interconnect. So if you don't like to listen to Rafe talk and you're mostly interested in the guests, this won't be your favorite one. But it's a very interesting conversation. So yeah, without further ado, here's my conversation with Brandon Douglas. So I think this is gonna be pretty relaxed. I'm super exhausted and like it's been just a super intense time. So should be chill. Let's make it chill.
Yeah. What's been so intense? Or, I mean, obviously shit's wild, but how is it affecting you?
Yeah. So, the biggest kind of financial center of our business is our week-long and 4-day retreats, and we had to cancel one. We might have to cancel more, so all that money's in jeopardy, and we can't really market anymore, right? And then we had all of our 2-day retreats, which we have to basically just stop selling, right? Or we just canceled them all. That's been like, just figuring out what this looks like going forward. And we're lucky compared to most people in the industry who are movement teachers, because we don't rely on our regular classes, and we don't have large liability from owning a gym, and we are already positioned to move online when like everyone's going to want to move online. But still, it's just a huge, like, having to kind of go from looking at a few different things to like hyper focus. And so that's been going on, and just life.
Yeah. And is there anything that you see happening on the other side of this that you felt like was like inevitable, that this has kind of been helped quicken in a way, maybe, in terms of like, I mean, I love that your thing has evolved, because I'm really fascinated with evolution and human evolution.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, like, why is this happening now? Like, how does this play into our evolution as a species?
Mm-hmm.
Is it like going against nature? Is it, or is it, is it something that's like, this was bound to happen just because of the way we've been moving?
In a lot of ways, you can say historically, this is actually just a return to normal. That we've always lived in the era of the pandemic, or at least we've lived in the era of the pandemic since, the Romans, basically, right? It doesn't seem like in the early Roman Empire or the Roman Republic or the Greeks that they had nearly as much. I mean, they had problems with this, but it wasn't as bad. But once you kind of connected the world island, it got really, really bad. And if you look at history, I think that's one thing that a lot of people who are skeptical about this, or who are COVID deniers, it seems to me they just really have a lack of historical priors. Because when you read about smallpox, and you read about plague, and you read about measles and cholera and typhus and all these things that have come through, it's like those things were crippling to society, and they changed the whole culture at times. Like one of my theories, or my hypothesis, I would say, is that like we have this perception of the past as being like super sexually repressed. Like Christianity and European culture was hyper sexually repressed, and there always has been a vein of that. But I think my impression is that during the medieval period, and this is kind of speculative because we don't have a lot of evidence from like the common people, but my impression is that the common people were really not that bothered by what the Catholic Church had to say. That sexual mores were relatively open during that time. There was a lot less shame about it, and it was after syphilis arrived that all of a sudden those super strict Victorian social mores became really common, because people were going crazy and dying from syphilis. And so the risk associated with sexuality, it wasn't just pregnancy. It was like, you might go insane if you have sex with the wrong person.
I mean, hey, syphilis or not, that could happen to you, I think, right? I don't know.
Yeah. So syphilis, I think syphilis had an enormous impact on sexual mores, and it's had this kind of like this lasting impact about the way we view the past. And then obviously when we got antibiotics and we got rid of syphilis and gonorrhea and chlamydia, it was like, well, that's when the sexual revolution happened. It didn't happen in the 60s for no reason. It happened because of antibiotics and the pill. And so I think that people just really underestimate how much history is driven by diseases. And coronavirus is not that bad on the standard of historical diseases. And so you might think, okay, well then we shouldn't be worried about it. But the thing is that our society is fragile to the impacts of pandemics in a way that previous societies weren't, right? Spanish flu doesn't cripple your entire economy because everything is local. But now everybody's supply chain is around the entire world. And so we're just we're much more susceptible to shocks like this. I mean, coronavirus is bad. You know, 1 out of every 100 people who get infected dying would be very bad. And like, you know, a much larger percentage of them having potentially permanent lung damage and neurological issues is bad. But I mean, smallpox might kill 30% of people when it hits a new area. So,
I mean, and we don't know, right? The numbers seem to be, it's been night. I mean, I shouldn't really talk about it because I've learned about some things about the immune system and ways to upbuild your immune system, you know, working where I'm at now, and different things you can do, and how that really plays into protecting yourself as an individual, and maybe why, you know, certain populations would have, you know, more compromised immune systems or more higher death rates. But I don't know. I haven't really been following it because I just, you know, luckily for me, I'm not, I'm not in a position where I like really need to know these things. I'm like, I'm happy to live my day-to-day life without, you know, knowing the exact number. You know, I know it goes back and forth. Like some people, what I get that trickles through and the things that I listen to is just that it's still a lot in the air. And
yeah, we don't really know, but I think the best evidence is that
years before we can really see like, okay, what was the actual infection and death rates. And
yeah.
so
Yeah, I mean, I think if anyone tells you know for sure, then they're trying to sell you something, or they're trapped ideologically in something. But the best evidence is consistently kind of comes back. We've had lots of points that have come back where that the IFR, the infected fatality rate, is somewhere between 0.6, right? So 6 out of every 1,000 people who get infected, and 0.12, so right, or 0.15. So most recently they had data from Spain and France that came out. This looks like pretty solid studies, you know, randomized population, subsets, everything, and it looks like IFR in France was in Spain was 1.2, and then in France it was like 0.9 or something like that. So it's much worse than anything that we've had for a long time. And we've built our society around efficiency. And there's, you know, are you familiar with the idea of the efficiency redundancy trade-off?
No, please elaborate.
So it basically, the more efficient you make something, the less redundancy there is in that system, right? And so efficiency actually fragilizes you, right? So you know, real simple example. It's like, okay, let's say that you know, you're going to be really efficient in how many dishes you have in your house, right? You don't want to have to do lots of dishes, so you're just going to have one plate. That's great, right? You're hyper efficient. You break your plate,
no plate.
you can't do anything, right? So there's lots of, like, you know, another really important example of this would be something like, okay, China has the cheapest high quality labor available. So lots of supply chains end up in China, right? So now more and more the entire world invests in China because that's the most efficient place that you can be in the market. And like, okay, well, you could have a factory in China and a factory in the United States. And then if something goes wrong in your factory in China, then you can back up your processes here in the States. Now that's not efficient, right? So you're gonna cut all those corners. But the problem is that then when something bad happens, you're screwed, right? Same thing, you know, and then you know, the terrible thing about our system is that we, you know, when you make yourself fragile and efficient as a corporation, you get more profits. Now, as you get bigger and you get more profits, then our government actually now tries to provide that resiliency for you by making you too big to fail. Right? So we've created this perverse incentive structure where all these companies that are essentially making our system as fragile as possible are now going to be protected by our government, which means basically protected by every individual taxpayer. So that's why we're spending trillions of dollars to bail out industry, and you know, the average American's getting $1,200, right? So to go back to your original question, the big thing was, you know, how is this creating the future? Well, perhaps we're going to come out of this with a lesson about like, you can't trust to have all your supply chain in China, especially when China views you as an ideological rival and is trying to win the, you know, the game of state against you. There's a, I don't know if you follow Eric Weinstein, but his podcast, The Portal, is my favorite podcast right now. And on one of the recent episodes, it was either, I think it was the Ryan Halliday episode, or Holiday, the guy who wrote The Obstacle is the Way. He talks about his wife saying like, COVID is bringing the future. Everything that was going to happen is happening, right? So like, there's been research for a while that shows that for a lot of jobs, remote work is more efficient than work in the office. It's like, well, that's now, right? Mm-hmm. Twitter just said that they're never going to require people to go back, right?
Yeah.
My wife just got hired by Google right before COVID happened. So as she was going to be onboarded at Google, like she was scheduled to go to Mountain View.
Oh, wow.
And then boom, nope, not going to Mountain View. Here's a computer, get started. She's never met her coworkers in person. Right? She's on this team that she knows only via online. And you know, they're not gonna, they've already said they're not gonna bring their workforce back at least this year. So in 2020, she's never going to go into a Google office.
Well,
so that, I mean, that's the future arriving.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the whole way we build cities may change, or the way that people live, right? Like, you know, if imagine the whole tech workforce is all concentrated in San Francisco, and that's just driven San Francisco, Seattle, Boston, just a few other places, Sydney, like all of that could go away,
mm-hmm.
right? All those people could move somewhere else, because like, why pay the money to be in San Francisco, especially in a world where you can't even socialize with people?
Yeah, it's what's the point of having that badass penthouse apartment or whatever, or condo? And
so yeah, they have a really good answer to that question. I don't know what, I guess in my little world of the movement culture, what's interesting to me is that I felt like we're trapped in the gym, right? Like I've been trying to solve this problem with our online courses and everything. Mm-hmm. So for years we've had this, we've noticed this thing that people come to our seminar and they'll say, oh, this is life-changing. This is amazing. This is like the best thing that we've ever experienced in the world, in the movement world. And I'm just like, oh, thank you. We'll come back a year later and we'll ask them, what have you been doing? And they'll say, well, mostly fighting monkey stuff, or mostly Ido Portal stuff. It's like, well, why is that? And I don't know, maybe they lied to me. But what I come to think was that actually it's much easier to adopt those practices when you already have a gym practice, because practicing, Kiri Jahin's, circles is something that you can do in the aerobics room in your gym. But practicing wall run tree climbs is something you have to go find the tree for. And so we have a cultural script around exercise that it's something that you do in the gym. And it's so strong and so persistent that I think that it's really hard to get in edgewise. And in a way, the parkour industry, the parkour movement, particularly in the States, kind of like got gobbled by that, right? We all went into the gyms. And I think it's so interesting because, like,
excuse me,
I don't know if you noticed this. Tell me if this was the same in Colorado, but it seems to me that a lot of times actually the outdoor community kind of died, right? Like there was a whole group of people who were willing to go do parkour outdoors. And then some of those guys go start a business that's indoors. And then you attract this massively more people who are willing to train indoors than are willing to train outdoors, but they're not actually the same people. And the people who started the community, a lot of them disappear because now they can't get anyone to go out and train with them outdoors. And and that was a big part of the reason why they trained in the first place. And so in some ways, it's like the gyms were birthed out of the outdoor community and then they killed it.
That is I definitely know what you're talking about. And I don't know that I've seen the exact same pattern here in Colorado, but it does seem that like, I do see that there's two populations, sort of, the people that prefer training outdoors and people that really gravitate and love spending their time training inside. And there's a little bit of a Venn diagram happening where that can really bolster the outdoor training. And I think that's what we saw at first. It kind of like boosted everyone's skills. People that really like being outside, having access to like really good shapes, consistent shapes to practice with, so you don't have to go find that tree or whatever. A lot of the outdoor practitioners, I would say they used the gym kind of to catapult themselves into the next level a little bit. But then those shapes inside the gym become too familiar, and it becomes harder and harder it's like I've been sharpening my sword on a certain kind of grit sandstone, and I need a new sandstone now. I'm already sharp as I can get on this one. I need something finer grade, and I'm only going to find that outside, or I'm only going to find it in a different environment, because the gym can't. I mean, maybe it can. Maybe that's the future. Who knows? But it's hard to make a gym so able to be updated that it actually can progress with you and provide new environment context that you don't end up mastering and eventually just kind of becoming bored with potentially, or and it might just be played into the psychology of somebody who likes training outside. There's a lot of other benefits you get. Like there's an exploration side of it. I think people that gravitate towards the gym, they are a little bit more fascinated and excited about the progression of like sheer athletic or skill development maybe. But I think for me and a lot of the people I know that train outdoors a lot, there's a more to it than that. It's less, even though they get probably more skill and more competency with the athletics and the tricks than most of the people that train indoors. There's this intangible component of being able to explore and being able to adapt to the environment that you just get diminishing returns after a while spending the time in the gym. And then all the gyms start to look alike as well, because they're all trying to kind of cater to that style. So then it kind of just, I don't know if that made sense, but basically, yeah, the gym starts to specialize you, where I think a true outdoor practitioner wants to become more of a generalist in some ways. Like they want to be able to adapt to more environments, and then
Yeah. I mean, what we've been talking a lot about on my podcast is the idea of the ultimate aim of movement practice as being the development of the capacity to solve problems. Every kind of practice, every environment, every little set of tasks has something that's general about how you learn to solve movement problems, and something that's specific. And some areas become very specific, and that can be very rewarding, but you're not gaining that much outside of it.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, there's so much more that's stacked in that experience of training outdoors. And if we're going back to that idea of what the future is for like parkour people, it's like the future is the past. The future is like, you got to go train outdoors, right? There's no gym anymore. The cool thing is you can train outdoors, right? Like, I don't know how many people realize this, but the most recent research is like, there's a lot of research now that shows that outdoor transmission is very rare, right? Like almost all transmission of COVID-19 seems to be in indoor spaces. So, wear a mask, maintain your social distance, but like people should not be afraid to go train parkour right now.
Well, and at the risk of, obviously this is not medical advice. I'm not any kind of whatever. Don't listen to me for that. But what I've been learning about the immune system and things that I have like discovered, it's just like being outside and soaking in vitamin D is like number one on the list of things you can do to boost your health and make yourself more resilient, so that even if you were infected, you might not even notice it,
There's good research that shows,
and exercise is a huge component of it as well.
Yeah, there's really good information also that shows that vitamin D in particular is protective against COVID-19.
Oh yeah, that started to come through recently.
Yeah. So go out into the sun, go play, be safe, don't cough on each other. But yeah, past is prologue maybe for where we're going as a community.
Yeah, it's almost like we reached like someone described it to me once as like we went out, like we've been looking outward for new and new things, and it seems like we might to me there seems, and this is total conjecture, but it seems like there's a shift towards like returning to, all right, what's the, like you said, the past, like where we need to know ourselves better and where we came from, and we're not going to be, I don't think we're going to be doing that without returning to, like you said, like more primal instincts, or at least to balance the expansion into technology. We have to kind of like, I think we have to dive deeper to like even it out almost. Like, does that make any sense? I feel like if we ride the technological development too hard without kind of also balancing it out with these movement practices, we start to feel like we lose humanity or something, or it becomes unsustainable. And I think, well, it's just a hypothesis, but it's just like, I wonder if it's something that is like a natural occurrence to help balance out this technological expansion and, the ability to work remotely. We also want to now, all right, we have to have more primal instinct movement practices and less, I don't know what you were about to say, but probably something.
I mean, that's very much behind the whole idea of evolve, move, play is, right? Like that. Eric Weinstein, I'll quote him again. He said something I really liked. He said, "We've become gods, but for the wisdom." Right? So technology has made us more and more powerful, but we're not any wiser about how to use that power. And in fact, like what my buddy John Vervaeke argues is, in fact, we've lost access to the tools that build wisdom, right? That we've killed essentially our wisdom traditions, and that we need to recover them in order to be able to deal with stuff. So that's a lot of essentially what we're trying to do with Evolve, Move, Play, is essentially help people reconnect to the fundamental aspects of being a living, embodied creature in the environment. Because without that foundation, it's like we're just experiencing these things so fast, and they're disturbing. We don't recognize what we're losing. It's like we can't even know what's good.
Yeah. No, it's like, well, there's the Joseph, I'm actually not that familiar. I'm getting more and more interested in this stuff, but there's the hero's journey, right? The Joseph Campbell. And there's a portion of that journey where you have to, forgive me, you have to correct me if I'm, out of speak here, but there's a part where you rescue your father, right? And like John Vervaeke is I know he works alongside or in the same departments as Peterson, and that's one of the things that Jordan Peterson often talks about is you got to go under and rescue your dying father and bring him into like the future. But there is, wisdom down there, right? That he still kind of holds, and there's kind of this meta thing happening potentially with the whole of humanity, where we were having to rescue our, like you said, wisdom traditions, and like collectively rescue, like, all right, whoa, okay, we've gone too far. Now we got to go back and get something that got us here, to know what's good or know what was valuable that brought us this far. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think it was Eric Weinstein again, who on his podcast was talking about, someone he was talking to was talking about the idea that, no, it was Razib Khan. Razib Khan on his podcast was saying that history professors have a hard time getting people to take an interest in anything that happens before 1960.
Really?
Yeah. And this is such a problem because history is happening faster. So like, I think the central problem that we have in our culture is basically that, so imagine you have an exponential technological curve, right? The technology changes faster and faster, and think of culture as something that works to match the organism and its needs, its base biological drives with the environment, and the environment is is the ecology, but it's also the economic and technological environment, right? So, a basic human need is companionship, love, sexuality, right? So,
For now.
right. Yeah. When I was growing up, like, how did you meet that need? Well, we didn't have Tinder, right? But now it's like, if you wanted to try to date necessarily the way that people did earlier, it might not work, right? So the whole it's like we have this whole module in our culture that has to get updated because now new technology has changed it. Well, when you're if you think about this as like writing code, the faster you have to write the code, the more likely you are to have bad code, and also the more likely you are to produce dependent outcomes where, like, okay, I have this bad code and I have to write the next piece of code based on that bad code. And so we're accumulating junk evolutionarily because we don't have enough. Because it's happening so fast that we can't update in an elegant way. And this happens like at the base evolutionary level, right? Like, this is actually how your genes evolve, is that stuff will just get dragged all over when you're under really, really excessive speed of selection. And so I think the only way that we can adapt to that is we have to be able to look back more effectively. And we have to be able to, like, extract the wisdom principles from the past, from different cultures, in a much more efficient way. Because if we have a naive kind of cultural response we have to have something that accelerates our ability to respond to the situation in the same way that we're accelerating our ability to create new situations. So technology creates new situations, but it's like wisdom is where you get the ability to respond elegantly. And so if this is doing this and this is doing this or this, it's like we're getting more and more powerful and stupider about that power.
Yeah, and the whole system becomes, like you said, just increasingly fragile and built. We have the same foundation potentially of wisdom that we had collectively, that, like you said, maybe 1960, or who knows when it started to really taper off, and all of a sudden it's just it's a house of cards, and there's a lot of expansion here that we don't know exactly where the foundation really sits.
Yeah.
That's like sturdy, and that we can. And it's hard to update that because we're having to update it right now as a whole planet in some ways, especially with this COVID situation. It's like we're being called to like settle and agree on certain global approaches, and it's really hard to update because we're gonna have to integrate all these cultures. And what's the through line of wisdom between some dude in an island in the South Pacific and this hotshot New York banker or whatever? Like, those two lives have to kind of have some common ground. We're gonna have to find it sounds like.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, I mean, maybe we're going to live in a less interconnected world, or maybe it'll be interconnected.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, go ahead.
But for some reason I wanted to ask you this. Like, did you watch the movie Fight Club before you started parkour?
I did.
Yeah.
I think before I started it might have been like around the same time, or I don't know.
Because, like, for me, I saw it when I was 19, and and then I started parkour when I was 23. But do you remember how that movie impacted you?
The first time I watched it, I don't think I fully understood it, but I think there was a huge resonance happening with just the themes, like even themes that I think if I watched it now, I'd really understand kind of what the meaning behind each character is a lot better, just because I've been more interested in story and how people represent things through pieces of art like that. But yeah, I connected to it deeply in that, it is this dichotomy of just like where your instinct and your biology is like dissecting you, or rather the society and the technology is dissecting, this chunk of you away, and how there's something that will find its way through, perhaps violently, like in that film, if it's real.
I think that film is, for me, it's kind of like it's the scream against the alienation of the modern world, and probably like as eloquent as anything, right? There's that moment where they're sitting in the bar, right? And Durden says, we work jobs that we hate to make money that we don't need to buy things, to make money to buy things we don't need to impress people we don't like.
Mm-hmm.
And, like through Vervaeke and Peterson, all these guys, there's this articulation, this idea of the meaning crisis, right? That fundamentally we have more wealth, more power, more health in a lot of ways. Well, in some ways, not so much, but in other ways, it's like, you have enough food and lots of the diseases that used to kill you aren't around. Live way longer and you're less likely to get assaulted. And yet there's something also that's deeply, deeply wrong. And I think that kind of like sums it up. And it's a sense of alienation. One thing that Vervaeke talks about is this idea that the life feels surreal, right? When we're disconnected from what gives a sense of meaning into our life, it starts to feel as if it's not real, which is like a lot of people are experiencing that with COVID-19, right? It's like, this is not the world that I know. Mm-hmm. And so in Fight Club, they come together and they create a tribe and they engage in intense physical practice and they take risk. And through that, they get some kind of growth that becomes deeply meaningful to the individuals. Right? And so to me, that parallels so deeply what parkour offered to a generation of mostly young men, but also women, right? And so I come back a few years, like Fight Club blew my mind and I wanted to start a Fight Club, but I didn't, right? But I was training martial arts.
We actually started Parkour Fight Club with like
I remember that.
Whatever.
And I was like, you skinny kids who have no martial arts background, none of you want to fight me.
Swinging,
badly hurt. Yeah. But yeah, I actually had a boxing club at university and stuff like that. But so I saw that and I was it resonated so deeply with me. Like, I would say probably the only other work of art that's had such a like profound meaning for me right from the beginning was like The Lord of the Rings. But there it was, and it was like the question. It was the question that we all had, right? But nobody could articulate. But then when I experienced parkour, I went back to the movie and it didn't have nearly the same meaning because they're almost inversions of each other. In Fight Club, ultimately, the path out of the alienation of society becomes destructive. And it becomes anti-society. But parkour was like this ethos of be strong to be useful, be something that could help society. And it seemed to answer the questions well. But then I like go back to it even later and I see this the nihilism that creeps into it, and I see the cult aspect of the cult of Tyler Durden's personality, and I realize that whether it's parkour or yoga or anything or meditation, like that movie isn't just like a scream against the alienation of society. It's also a warning that anything that captures the power of the tribe and the power of shared effort and of intensity also has this potential to be very easily hijacked to something dark. So it's like, so for me, it was just it's a really beautiful kind of thing to kind of keep in my head about like how to be Tyler Durden, but not Tyler Durden, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Right. It's there's no formula to, like, as soon as you try to nail it down, it becomes an ideology. It becomes something that robs you of life, robs you of that existence, and it just becomes something new that you'll end up screaming against, or whispering against, if that's the appropriate.
Well, if we go like connect it to the Peterson thing, right?
Yeah, please.
The hero has two roles. There's chaos when it presents itself, right? Let's say COVID-19, right? The heroic individual is the person who looks at a problem like COVID-19 and says, I'm not going to run away from it. What can I do to attack it and make it better? Right now, our heroes are doctors. Right. That's the hero that is needed right now. That's the person who's prepared, who has a sword to fight this particular dragon. But there's another hero, which is the hero who confronts the tyranny of society. Right. So not only do we have the problem that COVID-19 is this, novel pandemic moving through our population, we have the problem that we have the most incompetent people possible, in some sense, in office. We have the problem that the World Health Organization is deeply controlled by China, and it was lying to us, saying that masks don't work, there's no human to human transmission, you don't need to be worried, just a couple months ago.
Oh my God.
And the CDC was saying masks don't work, right? So we face this dual problem, which is like, this thing is out there, this is the dragon, you got to confront it. But also the society itself is fundamentally dysfunctional, and that has to be confronted too, right? And you always have those two things. So, but there's this ambivalence, right? Without the ambivalence, you become dogmatic and destructive, right? So in Fight Club, the dogma becomes that society is utterly corrupt and has to be reset. But what we need is, yes, we need to attack what's stagnant in our society, but also we need to go back and harvest what's wise about our society, right? So you descend into the underworld and you confront the tyranny of your society. That's father culture. But you also have to go back into the underworld and bring back the bones of father culture. And so I think that's what's hard to hold on to is these roles. There's also this role of sometimes when you have to confront the tyranny of society. So there's the dragon slayer, right? The dragon slayer attacks the chaotic. Mm-hmm. But there's also like I don't know if it's as easily described, but you could think of it as the hero who brings back the waters of life.
Yeah.
In Master Meaning, Peterson's book, he talks about I struggled to go find it in the book again, but it's basically the story of a tailor, and there's a hole in the sky, and all the water is pouring out through this hole, and then nobody else is getting any water. So you have the parched kingdom, and he goes and sews the sky closed there, and it allows the rains to fall. Right? And somehow the sky is ripped open somewhere, and there's no rain somewhere else because the kingdom itself has become too tyrannical. And so that tailor, he basically brings something chaotic back to the world. And I had this funny realization that it feels like, to me, parkour is both, right? Because you can think of when you're confronted by a jump as that's the confrontation with chaos. To go out and confront a jump is to voluntarily partake in that heroic journey. But also, what parkour did was to reimagine a ordered urban space as all of a sudden having all these dragons that could be confronted. Mm-hmm. Right? They invited back, and like, think about where parkour was born. Parkour was born in these terrible, brutalist, modernist, like, suburbs on the outskirts of Paris, like the most oppressive places to live in the world, right? Designed to destroy the human spirit in every possible way. And these kids say, we're going to create the beauty of human art and movement through these spaces. We're going to find a way to love this horribly ugly city. And blocks of concrete will become, opportunities for art. So
I love it. I love that I love the way you put that. It's amazing. And I totally agree. That's what we're doing and then that's what they did for, they started, that was a a new approach that's kind of like Fight Club, like you said. It's just
Dude, I mean,
extreme.
have you read Julie Angel's book?
Yeah, I have.
So how does it all start?
I can't remember, but
So Jan Hinachiro and David Bell are at an arcade, and for reasons that are unremembered, they almost get into a fist fight. So Jan realizes in the middle of this confrontation that David is friends with one of his friends, and he decides to like, okay, we'll be buddies. But like the way that they're friends is to challenge each other constantly, right? So it's like, who can get, who can do the most push-ups, who can do the most squats, who can lift this car, who can get punched in the stomach the most times. Right? People don't, like, it's kind of forgotten that like in the origin of parkour, there was actually a lot of martial arts. Like a lot of these kids had a martial arts background, and they were training this together. They were fighting, right? So it literally was in some sense Fight Club. Like it was so close to what Fight Club was. And there was so much about it that was about confrontation. And, if you read Stefan Figueroa's stories about his experience with David, it's like, David's a Tyler Durden character for sure, right? He is incredibly angry at society, and he's expressing it this way. And he is pushing like, you're not allowed into his little cult unless you are willing to like do everything that he asks of you.
Stand outside.
Right.
Or,
like
miles of QM, same thing. But
yeah, if you're on the edge of a building and you don't jump, he pushes you off the building. Right?
Wow.
Like they hang from each other's hands on the edges of buildings.
Mm-hmm.
I showed Stefan Figueroa a game that we play where we lock hands with each other on top of a curb, and we try to wrestle each other off the curb. And he's like, "Oh yeah, David and I used to play that. We would play at 12 feet high."
Jesus.
So in some sense, like the origins of parkour is the real life story of Fight Club. But there's this interesting place where like it bifurcates, right?
Yeah.
There's the place where like this desire to grow is motivated so much by anger. And then there's a place where it goes into a place of love, right? Stefan says, right, in some sense, training with David, as powerful and impactful as it was like training to the dark side. And then he went and trained with Williams, and Williams was like the light side of the force. And in the book, there's a moment where Williams I think he's 11 years old when this realization arises for him. He does this jump, and it transforms him, right? He feels like, because his brothers could do this jump, he's so much younger than them, and he comes and he's able to do this jump. It's like, it's this rite of passage for him. And it feels like totally transformational. And then he brings his friend, and his friend does the same jump, and he can see that the jump didn't mean to his friend what it meant to him. And then he makes this switch, this realization that what he's there for isn't the jump, it's the meaning. And so it's like, that's where my work is, right? Like that's what I've been trying to do. But like Williams made that realization in like, I don't know, 1995 or something, and he was an 11-year-old boy. And yeah, so there, the reason I wanted to bring us back to this like Fight Club thing is it's like, I can tell you what Eric Weinstein says and what Jordan Peterson says, and Daniel Schmachtenberger talking about how we're stuck in this self-extinguishing cycle of exponential stuff, but I'm mostly just re-articulating them, right? But there's something interesting about the fact that the movement community, the parkour people, we share interest in this. Like there's so many people in our community who are picking this stuff up, and there's like a kind of insight that's coming out of it. It's like I'm having chats with John Vervaeke because he's intrigued by how parkour in some sense is like a seed for a practice or a set of practices of wisdom cultivation that can be a solution for the problems that we face in the world.
I mean, what I just was illuminated with was just the what part of what we're doing is we're getting back in our bodies, right? That is part of the wisdom that we've lost, just the ability to be inside your body and using like your humanity and just a base, interacting, knowing things are real, feeling the pain. The Fight Club, it's at least the pain can be a measurement of what's authentic in that world. And if you shin yourself, or at least ankle thingy, whatever it is, like that is feedback that is real for the first time for many people. And I think that's partially, yeah, like that's sort of a shift, is we're like, all right, well, let's at least get back in our bodies. We could go a little bit further, into some circuitry, but and it's not to say that some people aren't, like Elon Musk is a huge tech wizard, right? But he's also kind of on the front lines of doing some of this stuff. And, I think he's one of the people that's trying to bring the reins, in your analogy through, he's rebelled against, them trying to to become too orderly, I guess, with his Tesla factories, for example. And now he's like, well, you know what? If I can't do business the way I want to do it, I'm going to go to Texas or somewhere else where they'll let me live, but I think it's fascinating. I think that's probably what is so interesting about why Vervaeke is probably interested in it, is just, this idea of just using our bodies again. Like we've neglected just being inside our human forms. And the stronger, the more like I've been able to train, and I've developed like a lot more muscular tissue, and just like I understand my biology, at least internally, a lot better now. The more I just recognize like how odd it is in some ways that some people are, it looks so out of balance to me. And when I see certain people on the street, and I'm just like, they don't know. It's really just it's kind of sad that they don't know, to me, that there's even these existing things, their muscular tissues or their posture is so weakened that I think they benefit just from like learning how to feel their body,
Yeah.
Do you think that's accurate in a way that just,
Yeah.
we've got just too far outside our bodies, and part of our wisdom recovery is just people learning how to get back inside their bodies, just more exercise, but not just more exercise. I think what you're onto something with the movement in the parkour communities is exercise with the human body as the kind of primary focus, the mover, and not, being on a bike as much, or being
just training the muscle and treating the
yeah.
body machine. Have you run into like the interviews I've done with Mark Walsh and like the whole idea of the embodiment community?
No, I haven't. Is there a nugget you can share from that?
Yeah. So, let's say you can train, you can practice something as a way of like attaining a skill. You can practice something as a way of achieving something externally, or you can practice something as a way of shifting your experience state of the world. So there's a whole set of traditions that have kind of gotten very deep in that. That's like the internal martial arts in the Asian world. That's yoga. That's like various traditions of dance and therapy, and like body-oriented therapy. And all of that comes together kind of in this world of embodiment. And so Mark Walsh introduced me to that. And then that's also very congruent with kind of the work of Vervaeke, right? Vervaeke is a cognitive scientist, and he's part of a generation of cognitive scientists, third gen cognitive science. It's called 4E cognitive science, right? So the 4 E's are: cognition is embodied, it's embedded, it's enacted, and it's extended, right? So what that means is, if you think back to Descartes' idea, I think, therefore I am, right? That's the idea that the thinker is somehow central, and everything else is derivable from the thinker. And so when we start trying to build thinking machines, we think that we can build the capacity for thought, the capacity to solve problems and see things and perceive things, into a just sort of like incorporeal thing. But it turns out that's very hard. Like the very basic thing is like, make a computer recognize what a glass is. Okay. So these two objects are meaningfully the same to us. Or let's look at this object. Okay. So this object is metal and has a handle, and this object is glass and does not have a handle. And they're two different shapes, right? So how do I have the computer recognize that this and this are in the same class of objects, but say a blue glass ball that is enclosed is excluded? So it turns out that this is very easy to us because because this object affords something meaningful to us. It affords the capacity to grasp. It's a cup because we can grasp it. And it affords the capacity to have something poured into it and to contain that thing, right? So if it had a hole in the bottom, it's not a cup anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But those things are only meaningful because they fit our body. They're fitted to our body. They're coupled to our capacities, and they afford us something. I can drink from this cup. So if you want to teach a computer to recognize that, the best way to do it is to actually give it a hand to pick something up.
Oh, wow.
So what we realize is that the entire way that we perceive and our whole capacity to think is actually derived from embodiedness. Like this is a central realization of cognitive therapy, cognitive science. So then the next level of that is not only do we think through a body, that body is embedded in an environment, and the way that we think is extended into our environment. And then in order to think, we actually have to act, right? You can only, like, thinking is basically action abstracted. Right? Peterson says we think that our thoughts may die so that we don't have to, but you can't actually think something unless you have some kind of action pattern that you've actually experienced to some degree that can help you derive that thought. So as a child, you don't think lots of things because you haven't experienced those things. You have to first build this vocabulary. Then you can start extracting it and abstracting it into your mind. And then it's extended, which is to say that our cognition is networked into an entire set of agents, right? Like my thoughts are not my thoughts alone. They're also your thoughts and all these other people's thoughts. And it's very difficult to say where they begin and end. History, the whole thing. So we have this 4 E's of cognitive science. So our tradition, in some sense, has robbed us of the wisdom of the body. Mm-hmm. So this is like Christianity. Wonderful bad things about Christianity, but one thing that happened within the history of Christianity is this idea of the body as profane, and of the sacred as separate and existing on another level. And Vervaeke calls this the two worlds of mythology. It's not only in Christianity, it's also in Platonism, right? It's also in Buddhism. Like Nietzsche argues for the reclamation of the embodied experience. So there's something that's been there for a long time. And parkour, among other things, is a pathway towards like using your physicality as a tool to cultivate yourself as a human being, rather than just to be healthy or to look good and attract someone sexually, right? And I think that's why I was thinking about this this morning, actually, this idea that like there's something almost insipidly spiritual about parkour as a practice. I use that word with hesitation because I think that spirituality is a word that that has certain implications that allow people to sell a lot of bullshit under that label. Mm-hmm. But there's something interesting about this quest that people start to go down within parkour, that you see many people start to find other questions that are related to that, right? So many people in the parkour community are interested in Jordan Peterson, right? Or they end up going into like nature, wilderness awareness stuff, animism, shamanism,
yeah,
or like psychedelics, right? How many people who are parkour people are really into like DMT trips and and mushrooms? It's like there's something about it that's beginning to initiate this process of proactive self-transformation.
I'm with you there. I think so. I think that's one of the reasons I certainly latched onto it.
Yeah.
Like why it has taken me in and out of a perceived parkour norm or culture or community that you know, in my view, is just broader than what a lot of people look at it as, because I see the parkour community as encompassing, or maybe not the parkour community, but whatever, just people that practice parkour. They also see this trend of they get embodied, but they're on this whatever spiritual path, we can call it, where they're trying to ascertain certain insights and wisdoms about themselves and about the experience of life itself.
Mm-hmm.
And through the practice of parkour, they get to a certain point, but they, just like being inside a gym can constrict you at one point, in your development as a parkour athlete, potentially, if you constrict yourself to only training parkour, it's the same kind of constriction. And so you might want to get into animism or mushrooms or whatever it is. The rope, Tim Sheaf and the WEC method, I actually picked up a rope.
Yeah.
Just because I'm curious, I'm like, all right, let's see what this rope's about. I've been fucking with the rope. I've been fucking with the rope for a few hours or a few weeks. And I mean, I'm not gonna like give it a review necessarily, but I just think that it is conceptually fascinating to me that we're tying left and right hemispheres of your brain and body together and trying to at least get like new neurological pathways formed across those hemispheres, because I see that as kind of this connection we're trying to build, throughout this whole conversation, is like this, we're trying to bridge order and chaos in certain ways. We're trying to bridge, not bridge order and chaos, but bridge the dealing with order and chaos in a way that, is new and integrated in some way, and bridge the technology with the biology and find, our center. And I think, it's just another part of the inward practice, but whatever. The rope's cool. I got nothing against the rope. I just,
I don't have anything
fascinating that you you're going to be searching, and whatever. Tim Sheaf had done a lot of other things. And I've done a lot of other things that we'll see which ones are actually fruitful. We don't know yet exactly, but
yeah. So I think that we need this marriage of, for lack of a better word, let's call it a spiritual quest, or a quest for self-transcendence anyways, with also like a rooted epistemology in like a scientific epistemology, right? For people who aren't familiar, epistemology is the knowledge of how we ascertain truth, right? That's what that means, right? So what is your way of recognizing what is truthful? And that's what I don't like about spirituality, because spirit implies that there is like a metaphysical thing outside of us, right? That's the real thing. And then, you see people make all sorts of sort of, my friend Todd Hargrove has this term deepities, right? Where they'll say something that sounds very profound, but if you think about it, it either means something mundane, like we're all just energy, man, right? We're all just energy, man, right? It's just waves of energy. It's like, okay, so on a quantum physics level, right, like mass and energy are equivalent, right? Or general relativity level. Okay, cool. So you're implying something that is completely uncontroversial and has almost no applicable meaning. Or what you're trying to do is use that scientific meaning to uphold some bullshit about how I'm going to be able to kill you with my chi if I build my spiritual powers enough, right? So this is the other interesting thing, is like I feel like parkour also works really well in a sense as a place to build a good epistemology. Not only parkour, I also see a lot of like really strong epistemology coming out of like Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Like when I look at the people who have the most rational takes on COVID-19, who aren't virologists or epidemiologists, it's like there's a lot of martial artists and parkour athletes and stuff like that, but it's always the ones who like do real shit. It's like not the ones who just like dance and play around on the ground.
Yeah, fair.
Because if you lie to yourself about the effectiveness of your wushu routine, or about how much of a movement generalist you are because you do ketogene circles on the ground and, like corticapium circles or whatever. It's like, there's no fitness function. You don't get punished by it. But parkour, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, boxing, judo, all these things will slap you in the face if you think that you can do something and you can't.
Mm-hmm.
It's like parkour athletes don't get to pretend that the truth doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Unless you're as talented as Daniel Ilbaka.
Then, yeah.
Like his capacities were so far away, he could just believe that God willed him to do things. But the rest of us fall sometimes and realize that we didn't choose it.
Oh man, you chose it. You chose it. You weren't strong of mind enough, strong of spirit.
You see what I mean? Like,
you don't have spirit. You
so
don't have
these two things, like a fitness function, and then also a reach towards a self-transcendence. And it's like, we need both.
Mm-hmm. And it's being in that zone that's important, right? Because, partly why Ilibaka was so prolific, I think, is because he was able to tap into a frequency of himself that was authentic and real.
Yeah.
That just made him certain. Like I'm sure I felt it in my training where you can know if you can do something.
Oh,
and
yeah.
like, of course you're going to fall sometimes but you also know when you're playing with fire and when you're a little bit more just like, this is happening next.
So, yeah.
And if you have a really, it's very circumstantial. I think there's a lot that goes into it.
Mm-hmm.
But, if with someone like Ilibaka, I think I just see somebody who tuned into that just reality in a really big way, until he didn't, maybe eventually he did get slapped up, and then that's what takes some of us out. It's certainly, I've been in a zone where I've been like, I am fucking right there. I know exactly what I'm capable of, but it's eventually you reach a little bit past your limit, and I got knocked unconscious, literally. I mean, like, I suffered a concussion because I was just overcommitted basically to a movement.
Yeah.
And in the same way that you can overcommit to a strike in fighting and get knocked out. And I had to learn a lesson in hubris and a lesson in just being more measured and listening, and again retuning into my body, because what that came down to for me was just not really listening and being more focused on some of these external factors and getting it completed and being overconfident. But if you are in that zone, then it seems like you can make the choice to, maybe even if you don't fall, maybe even if you don't complete the challenge, you don't eat shit, or get knocked out, you're still in it. Reality is happening in the way that you feel in control.
Yeah.
But all that to say, just, I love that parkour, I've always seen it as a martial art as well. And I always think that it is real feedback. Like you said, I love that you said you can't pretend that.
Yeah, you can't pretend that you can do a jump. It's like, you can't jump 30 feet, right?
No.
If you think you can jump 30 feet, you're going to get hurt, right? Well, I guess Dom Tommaso now did like a 30-foot flip drop.
And again, like, there's something he knows, there's something that he's knowing, that
feedback, right?
There's something real that is because he's pushing it in a way that, a lot of us, we would think that's impossible.
Mm-hmm.
Especially because it hasn't taken him out yet. So he's discovered something, he's discovered something real. It might just be that he's discovered that, wow, I have a lot more capacity to take impact than the average human,
Mm-hmm. Maybe it comes back to bite him, right? We don't know. But I'm having a really interesting experience right now, like on this, like this idea of the spiritual and its intersection with the physical practice. I've been noticing something recently about that, where I'm 38 years old, and like I trained parkour and reached a pretty high level by the time I was like 30. Like I was running in those competitions and I was doing pretty well. I was competitive, at least, if not one of the dominant athletes for sure. But I never really explored movement at heights when I was in the urban/gym community, because like very early in my parkour experience, I became a leader of the community, and I was always anxious about getting arrested and trespassing and kind of showing up in the news and giving a bad reputation to parkour. So when I started training in nature, it actually opened the door, because it was like, I can jump between 2 tree branches and I don't have to trespass to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've kind of discovered my relationship with heights really late in my training career. And as I was starting to explore it, I always had this idea like, okay, well, eventually there's a point where you need to move past this, because you can't keep expanding this forever. You're going to age out of it. And I actually thought that had happened. Like, I was like, okay, I did a bunch of crazy height stuff when I was in Europe 2 summers ago, and I came back and my knees were all baked, and I just took some time off, and it was like a summer went by, and I was like, okay, I didn't do any height stuff. Probably not going to do height stuff for a while.
Yeah.
Ever again, really, at that level. And then this spring, all of a sudden, it's like all these jumps at height are calling to me. They're just right there for me. And I feel really, really dialed in, and like I've been going through, I do this meditation practice where I do focus meditation, right? So I look at a point and I breathe, and I try to just keep my mind on that point as much as possible, and try not to resist other thoughts, but to try to get to this point where the other thoughts just simply don't catch in my mind as they come through. And I'm just completely zoned into this, right? And then I'll do a body scan, right? Like, how is my body? And then I'll do a loving kindness meditation. And I had this realization, well, one, like the stronger your focus is, the less likely you are to get injured. The more that you can pay attention to exactly the thing that needs to be paid attention to, the safer you are. But also, like, I am not convinced that a lot of the people who are chasing heights aren't doing it in a self-destructive way. Right. And I think that, like, you stay safe, that when you have that loving kindness meditation, it actually helps you stay safe. Because, like, you ground yourself in, is this choice that I'm making actually loving towards myself? And like, I love my wife, I love my children, I love my community. Am I behaving in such a way that I'm putting those connections at risk? And it's like, when I'm in that state where I've like got those things checked off, and I look at a jump and I just know that I can do it, it's like, I know that I'm not, it's not coming from this ego place, and that feels really safe. Can we pause?
Yeah, go ahead. Pause. Energy.
Where does it come from? Okay, so I've got this recording, but you tell me if we want to share this. Okay. So I wrote this up. So this is a video idea I had. Okay, so what kind of tracer are you? Okay, you're wearing gloves, skinny jeans, and skate shoes. Chances are you spend most of your time jumping off playground equipment and screaming parkour, parkour. Your knees will be shot in a year or two, but that's okay, because you'll just be your drunk average kid in 4 years anyways. You're a parkour noob. Okay. You have sweatpants on, fayous, long hair. You're a parkour purist. You think God kills a kitten every time someone calls a flip parkour, but you spend hours spinning around on rails. You had an altar to David Bell in your room until he learned he teamed up with Fig, and now you're going through an existential crisis. You're wearing Kmart sweatpants and a sweatshirt and Kmart shoes. You only speak French. You think a mile of quadrupedal is a nice, gentle warm-up, and you're deeply offended when someone uses English terms for parkour movements. You're an original tracer. You have suspiciously expensive sweatpants on, fayous, and you have a man bun. You're a movement culture expat. You used to run, jump, and climb, but now you think the most important elements of being a mover are standing still in your hands, being able to touch your nose to your toes, and wiggling around on the ground. You're wearing harem pants, an overlength t-shirt, Vans parkour shoes. You're a free runner. The only difference between you and a shitty tricker is that you can't double cork without a platform. And you can probably flip off a building, but you can't do a decent climb up to save your life. And this is the one that kept coming up in our conversation. You're wearing merm shorts, nice t-shirt,
Wait, what was it? Merm shorts and what?
an expensive t-shirt,
Uh-huh.
knee-high pattern socks, and you're carrying around a kendama. You're a Colorado tracer. You spend most of your time descending down the outsides of parking garages. And yeah, your precisions are tight and you can jump really far. But you'd really rather be playing kendama if the peer pressure and existential angst didn't force you to risk your life every day.
Oh, man. That is hilarious. That is so funny. I love it. I mean, I think, yeah, I would love to see that fully articulated out. That's amazing.
And then here we go. Lem shoes, prana pants, yellow shirt, beard. Oh God, you've fallen for that hippie parkour shit. You're constantly plucking twigs out of your hair, and all your clothes have dirt and grass stains. And now you don't just suck at parkour; you can suck at martial arts and dancing too. And that's evolved move play.
Oh, that's great. That's so great. Yeah, man. I love it. We got to be able to make fun of ourselves. I think for a long time, there was just like, we weren't big enough to make fun of us. Like, it kind of made sense for us to be like, we all need to be on the same team. So like it's not helpful to talk shit right now. But also, I don't know, dude. And when it's funny, man. If it's funny, it's because it's kind of true. And if it bothers you, it's because it's something you probably need to look at. So I'm always about like, I think comedy is one of the swords towards truth. Absolutely. That I respect the most, as much as I respect movement practice. Yeah. Somebody who has wit and somebody who can take it to that, take 2 points of view and take it to a tertiary or meta level and makes you laugh. So you kind of see what's happening. I think laughter is always an indication of getting towards something good.
Yeah, I think, Jordan Peterson says the trickster archetype is next to the savior. It's like, it's the predecessor of the savior.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so often it's because very often the comedian is the only person who can speak certain truths when they're difficult to speak.
100%.
So the reason I specifically brought that up is because we've been talking about this idea of parkour as a spiritual path, and also the idea that there's a dark side to it. And, Colorado really has led the way in skill in parkour, in especially pure parkour, right? Like, if you want to have the best experience of flippers, like the best flippers in the world are, let's say, in LA, right? At least in the US. But if you want to see the biggest jumps, the biggest precisions, the craziest descents, right? The most complex skill work and speed work, like Colorado parkour has pretty much been where it's at for a long time. Mm-hmm. But I've also noticed that like a lot of people in the Colorado parkour scene have reported serious mental health problems.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. There's a huge concentration of people who are struggling with intense depression, anxiety, existential angst. Yeah. And I wonder to what degree they're related. Right?
I think about it often. 100%. Yeah.
And what is if parkour has a transformative power, or movement practice is a transformative power, maybe and I think all of these things, they're double-edged swords. And we don't know, right? Like, maybe this guy we watch on YouTube who's doing this incredible movement is like, he flips 30 feet, right? Does a 30-foot drop front flip and walks out, and he like enters nirvana, and he goes home, and like he gives all of his change to a kid on the street, and treats his wife perfectly, and his kids, and everybody he touches in his life becomes a better person, right? Mm-hmm. Or maybe that person who we're all admiring on that is like, is cutting themselves and doing heroin in the background, and blowing up their relationships with everybody in their life because you don't understand me.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, it's like, it's so hard to know, right? And you can. I mean, I don't know what the chemistry is behind it, but there is something to, even just I never thought I was like an adrenaline junkie or anything like that, right? But I know now that I have taken some hits, of adrenaline. I wouldn't say like I would say I'm like more sober from it now, or almost, than I would say that I'm never adrenaline junkie. It's like, no, I used to fuck with adrenaline. It's like I used to binge drink in college. I
Yeah.
have a healthy relationship with it now, alcohol, and I have a healthy relationship with height training and parkour generally, but especially like that stuff that will make you feel that hit of dopamine or whatever. I'm actually not sure which chemical it is that you get when you complete something that's scary, or when you get recognition for that potentially. But that is the dark side of training in some ways. And I think it's also important to wield it. I think one of the things that why we get involved in that is because, part of facing that chaos and facing that fear is also facing your own dark side, I'd say, and that's another whole, podcast just on like,
Yeah.
Carl Jung and shadow and developing your shadow side. But I don't know that, it's easy to come out of if like, it's just like when you specialize in it and you become super efficient, there's incentive. It's like the same way that we're incentivizing those companies you spoke of, with government subsidy. It's like, it's too big to fail. Well, Instagram double taps can be that incentive for some people, and like, and just constant encouragement to go further and deeper and higher with certain jumps. And
Why we do it is so critical, right? Like I had one of my students recently posted a video of her, and she lost like 20 or 30 pounds, right? So she's way leaner and she looks really fit and she's moving better. And I noticed it and commented on it. And then like I was gonna, like, first I was just like confirming that I had seen this was really true. And she's like, yeah, I lost the weight. And then I had this weird moment where I was like, I don't know if I should congratulate her. I don't know if I should encourage her, because I don't know if what she did was actually coming from the right place, or if like she's doing something that's deeply self-abusive, and the output is like, you can't tell from the outside whether it comes from the right place. It's like the same thing with these movement, right? Like with those of us who are achieving movement things. It's like, you may be achieving something extraordinary from a place that's actually deeply destructive of you. And yet the rest of us may be rewarding you for that.
Yeah. What's so fascinating to me is, and in my experience, you can use that as feedback too. That's part of the feedback you'll get. And that's part of the pain that you should pay attention to. And for me, again, just my own experience, if it helps anyone, it's like I was able to sort of shift my fuel sources from less sustainable fuel sources to more sustainable ones, and see an increase in like just joy experienced while training. And I think I definitely got better at the things I wanted to get better at too. And what I came up against with my training was that it wasn't like, it was that I was self-destructive. It wasn't that I didn't have enough work ethic, or didn't have enough, what a lot of people might think, you would come up against is like, oh, you just need to train harder or condition more. It's like, no, I was overtraining and destroying my body because I was so dedicated, but in a way that was pathological.
Yeah. I've come up with this idea that you need a combination of self-love and self-discipline to optimally grow and adapt as a human being. But it's not simply a matter of balancing these two things. It's also that when you don't truly know yourself or truly love yourself, it's easy to mistake self-discipline. It's easy to mistake self-abuse for self-discipline. And it's easy to mistake self-indulgence for self-care.
Oh yeah.
Right. So so I think of discipline as having a shadow side of abuse. and care as having a shadow side of indulgence, right? And I think that a lot of the people in these movement communities, right, like we think that there's this myth that the way that you are successful is that you just punish yourself harder than the next person, right? Like, you know, I don't know that much about David Goggins. Maybe everything about him is brilliant, but my perception of him, for what it's worth, the way that I imagine what he's putting out into the world is this idea that if you just grind through pain and suffering and terror, that's ultimately going to take you where you want to go. And my experience as an athlete is that I have overtrained myself repeatedly. And every time that I have tried to just force myself to become the next thing, it's resulted in injury, nervous breakdown, prolonged periods of depression, massive weight gain. Like, hard work is valuable, right? But it has to be work that's actually taking you in the direction. It's not just work to fulfill the idea of yourself as hardworking, or work to punish yourself for your indulgences. And you know, in that diagram that I've written out, the key to that is that you can't discipline yourself effectively, and you can't care for yourself effectively if you don't deeply know yourself and love yourself. Right. So like at the highest principles of our idea within Evolve Move Play of the heroic archetype, that archetype has to serve logos, right? Truth, and agape, like the love that brings good into being. And if you're not trying to proactively cultivate those things in yourself, it doesn't, in my opinion, it doesn't matter how hard you work or how good you take care of yourself, because you don't even know who you are, right? And you may be taking care of the worst part of you, or you may be pushing yourself to achieve something that's ultimately destructive of you.
Powerful stuff. I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I know you're a busy, man. You got kids, killing the game with all the podcasts, but I do want to ask, because that's so poignant. I think that's so cool to talk about right now to wrap up, is just what can people do? Like, what do you have people do in your weekend trainings or week trainings to help people discover who they are? And is there any advice that you have on that?
Yeah.
That's something that is completely individual. You can't take advice on.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I think all of what we do in some sense does that, and we're trying to find these balances there. But one of the reasons that it's called Evolve Move Play is this idea that play reveals what is deeply meaningful to you individually. When you play seriously, right? And you're different, you know, what you love and what I love, they're not exactly the same. And in going out and pursuing that passion, you find kind of your own little thing. So I think maybe for the more experienced parkour athletes in this area, one thing that would be a really great place to start to pursue truth is go train by yourself, right? Go turn everything off, turn your music off, do everything, and just say like forget your goals. Like, it doesn't matter who has the biggest Kong. It doesn't matter who can do the most flips. It doesn't matter how you've progressed through the skill tree. What movements do you freaking love? Right? Start to build a map of who you are. Journaling is great. Meditation's great. Conversations with friends. One thing that we found really powerful in our workshops is dialoguing. So like, okay, like you could do this with your friends, right? Like you can make parkour into a better wisdom practice by doing something like this. Okay, go do your challenge, right? Now, like you're doing a challenge for, say, 20 minutes, you're working through whatever it is that you're working on. Now, like, turn to your training partner, take a second, close your eyes, take a deep breath, look at them and say, you get 1 minute to say, what is the insight that you got from the practice? Right? What is that insight that you got from what you were just training? What did you learn? And if you practice that, you're going to gain more insight from your practice, right? You can do it with a journal, or you can just talking to someone, whatever works better for you. You can like I insight farm by talking to my phone, right? I just record videos. That would be where I would say to look for maybe some of that to start your practice of logos through movement. And then the other one, the agape, the self-love. I find that the metta meditation, the loving kindness contemplation, that's been incredibly powerful for me, and I'm not sure I have a better tool to offer people than that. So go look into doing a basic loving kindness meditation and see how that shifts the way that you perceive yourself and what's happening within your practice.
Right on. Badass things to say. I love hearing you talk about all this stuff, man.
Thank you, Brandon.
I really do. It's really cool to see, and I'm glad there's someone out there kind of thinking about some of the same things. That's also.
You broke up on me. I don't have your audio.
But I was just saying, yeah, I just love what you're doing, man, and I love everything you bring to the conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
About parkour and blending this stuff together. You know, there's so much interesting things happening in the world, and I'm ultimately concerned with this truth stuff and just seeing like what resonates and what's going to go forward.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. Yeah, I thought I was going to be interviewing you, but it turned into you interviewing me. So.
Aha, gotcha. This will be great. I'm sure your audience will really appreciate it if you do want to share this, because
yeah, I'll share it, and I'll just preempt it with like, I thought I was interviewing him, but he turned the tables on me because he's working on his podcast too.
Well, you're very interesting, so I'm really glad to hear you talk about all that stuff, and I appreciate you giving me some insights that I haven't thought about before.
Yeah. If you ever want to talk about this stuff and just talk about it for whatever reason, whatever's going through your head, anything that you're reading on these topics, and just want to like share with me what's going on, I'd love to keep the conversation going.
100%. Yeah, man. I appreciate it.
Cool.
All right. I'll let you get back to.
I'm going to go take a nap before my next interview. I've got another interview at 4.
Oh, baby. This guy, see? Punishing himself. No, he's doing it out of self-love.
Yeah.
Doing it out of self-love. All right. Much love, Rafe. Enjoy your nap. Take care.
Bye. Thanks for listening to the Evolve, Move, Play podcast. If you want to support what we're doing, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and hit that notifications button so you know what's coming up. And of course, the biggest support you can give is to become a Patreon supporter. This is what's going to allow us to grow this platform more than anything else. So this is entirely listener supported, and we really appreciate your support. And we look forward to talking to you again soon.